If you've been following all of the ongoing news about the Times Square attempted car bombing, you may have heard any of these assertions today. The suspect is connected to the Pakistani Taliban. The attempted bombing was retaliation for U.S. drone strikes in Pakistan. The suspected bomber is not just singing like a bird, he won't stop talking. The FBI lost him for hours. They only managed to track him down after secret army spy planes intercepted his phone call. Any or all of these assertions about this case might turn out to be true. But you should know that they are mostly anonymously sourced. Some of them are anonymously single-sourced. Many of them are transparently anonymously single-sourced to people who have obvious agendas for what they want people to think about this case and about counterterrorism in general. One exception to that, however, is a bit of rampant speculation that's not anonymous. The foreign minister of Pakistan went on record today to claim that the Pakistani Taliban is behind the attempted car bomb in Times Square, and he knows why. He says it's retaliation for U.S. drone strikes against terrorism targets in Pakistan. He said, quote, "This is a blowback. This is a reaction. This is retaliation. Let's not be naive. They're not going to sort of sit and welcome you to eliminate them. They're going to fight back." This is finally a bit of information not from an unnamed source. We know who is saying this. We also know that there's no reason to believe that he has any idea what he's talking about. At this point, there's no confirmation of any of the suspected bombers' contacts with the Taliban. There's certainly no way the Pakistani foreign minister knows the real motivations of this guy in America who is still under arrest and still being interrogated here. That said, even if he's not contributing any reportable facts to this discussion, I'm not sure if they do cable news in Pakistan like we do here, but if they do, maybe the Pakistani foreign minister has a future there as a bad pundit. If you ignore the dismissible stuff, the made-up stuff, the patently self-serving stuff in the wall-to-wall news coverage of this case, there are still some new reportable facts that we know, many of them now pointing to how inept Faisal Shehzad was if he did indeed try to bomb Times Square. You remember the story of how he left the keys to his house in the ignition of the SUV that he allegedly left in Times Square? Turns out that Mr. Shehzad had to call his landlord on the way home from New York City in order to let him into his house. The landlord told the Associated Press today that he got a phone call from Mr. Shehzad that night, the night of the attempted bombing, telling him that he lost his keys while he was hanging out with friends in the city, and please could his landlord let him in. Don't you hate it when you leave your keys in your bomb? As ill thought out and ill planned as this attempted attack was, it may be explained by the fact that the suspect didn't seem to have been planning it for very long.
It appears from some of his other activities that March is when he decided to put this plan in motion.
Remember, this incident happened on May 1st. If he only started planning for it in March, that means he was planning for it at minimum for a month, 1 month. In terms of actually seeing Faisal Shehzad, there was, again, no court appearance today. We still don't know exactly when his arraignment will happen. Frankly, there is 10 times as much dumb, unsourced or undersourced, politicized, fact-free chatter about this case than there is confirmable, knowable fact. I urge close reading of news reports or purported news reports about this story. But the lack of facts, the huge ratio between conjecture and fact in this case, is not stopping some really remarkable, really radical political responses to this incident. Last night on this show, we talked about Connecticut Senator Joe Lieberman's effort in the immediate wake of this failed bombing to strip your citizenship from you, to make you no longer an American citizen on the basis of some administrative government decision that you have terroristic affiliations. Now, Joe Lieberman wants to strip you of your citizenship not because you are convicted of anything, but again, because of your affiliations. In discussing this proposal last night, I asked our guest, Chris Hayes, if this might be some sort of stunt by Joe Lieberman that wasn't really going anywhere, if this was just another Senator Lieberman stunt to make, give a one-fingered salute to the direction of the Constitution in order to just make liberals mad. We know he enjoys that. Well, today we have our answer about that. Turns out this is not a stunt. Senator Lieberman is actually going to try to pass this bill.
I don't think it makes any sense to continue to give them the privileges of American citizenship. So to me, this is not a major step. I mean, this in no way will compromise any American's freedom of politics and political opinion and political action.
Tomorrow at noon, Senators Joe Lieberman and Scott Brown, along with Congressman Jason Altmaier and Charlie Dent, will introduce what they are calling the Terrorist Expatriation Act. The Terrorist Expatriation Act will empower the State Department to determine whether any U.S. citizen is affiliated with a terrorist organization. If they determine that about you, Senator Lieberman and company believe they can give the State Department magical extra-constitutional powers to un-Americanize you, to just administratively remove your citizenship. According to Mr. Lieberman, citizenship stripping would apply to, quote, any individual apprehended American citizen who is found to be involved with a foreign terrorist organization as designated by the State Department. Found to be involved is the language that Senator Lieberman is using here. But again, this isn't going to interfere with any of your rights. Any American citizen, even if you're not convicted of anything, can lose your citizenship if, say, Hillary Clinton decides she doesn't like some of the phone calls you've been making, or if Condoleezza Rice doesn't like who you've been seen with. The whole point of this is presumably to get defendants into military tribunals, because U.S. citizens can't be tried in military tribunals. We get tried in court, courts of law, like as if this is America. You see the point here, though, right? Heaven forbid we put defendants in the federal court system, which has convicted and put in prison or executed people like, say, Richard Reed, Zacharias Moussaoui, Ramzi Youssef, Timothy McVeigh, Terry Nichols, Omar Abdul-Rahman, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Rather, we can't put anybody in that system, that risky system. Rather, we must make extreme violence on the Constitution and the whole idea of American citizenship so we can reap this great strategic reward that Joe Lieberman sees of putting people in military tribunals instead of the court system. The record of military tribunals is hard to argue with here. There was, after all, this guy who was convicted and did 9 months in prison in Australia. He's now free. Then there was this guy who was given an extra 4 months in prison on top of what he'd already served. He's now free. And then there's this guy who is still in jail now, but that doesn't really count because he refused to mount a defense at his military tribunal. That's it. Those 3 guys. That's the whole record. Those are all the convictions that have been obtained ever through these military tribunals that Joe Lieberman is so excited about. 3 convictions so far, and 2 of them are already free. That's the counterterrorism prosecution record of the military tribunal system for which Joe Lieberman and Scott Brown and these members of Congress would like the power to strip you of your American citizenship. That's what they want to trade the Constitution for. Tough guys, right? Joining us now is Jonathan Turley, constitutional law professor at George Washington University Law School. Full disclosure here, Professor Turley is currently lead counsel on 2 terrorism cases. Professor Turley, thanks very much for joining us tonight.
Thank you, Rachel.
Democratic Senator Chuck Schumer came out today and said he believes this proposal by Senator Lieberman would be found to be unconstitutional. What's your view of it?
I think it's manifestly unconstitutional from what I've heard. I mean, among other things, it contradicts what the Supreme Court said in cases like Afroyim versus Rusk in 1967. The Supreme Court has said quite clearly the 14th Amendment was put into place to make citizenship permanent. The reason they put in the language of the 14th Amendment is they didn't want Congress to be able to strip freed slaves of their citizenship. So the whole thrust of the amendment, this is what the Supreme Court talked about in that decision, is to make it permanent. Now, the only way you can strip it is if you can show that someone acted in a way that shows their intent to renounce or give up their citizenship. So it's a very, very high standard. Now, we do have a provision, the 1481 provision, that does say that if you engage in armed struggle against the United States or treason, that those acts could be deemed as showing your intent to give up your citizenship. So you do have a provision like that. What Senator Lieberman is suggesting, in my view, is not just unconstitutional, it's un-American. I mean, this is something that goes to the core of this country. You can't just create stateless people because you believe that they're associated with organizations that an agency is deemed to be a terrorist organization.
That belief of association is the thing that makes this frankly, a top-of-the-show story for me that makes this such an almost unbelievable proposal from supposedly serious members of Congress. I mean, the government now determines who it thinks are terrorist groups. There is a process by which it does that. Is there anything about that process that I know you know something about that tells us what kind of due process we could expect as citizens if this Lieberman idea goes through, that you lose your citizenship if they think you're associated with the wrong people?
Well, it's somewhat ironic, isn't it? Conservatives are constantly complaining about big brother agencies, not recognizing deductions on their tax forms, and yet they would give an agency the authority to strip you of your citizenship. They must think very highly of the quality of work coming out of these federal agencies. The fact is that we have a system now of designating organizations as terroristic or terroristic associated. That process has been renounced. It is a very flawed process. There's very few due process protections. We've seen a lot of abuses. You don't get the same rights. You can